Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Daily Cyber episode number 287. I'm really excited about this episode. I was talking to Andrew, one of the guests I'm going to have on today. We already go into a kind of a deep conversation right from the start and jumping into security resilience, kind of what's going on in the world and how to help protect organizations. So I'm really excited about having Andrew on today's Daily Cyber and really kind of diving deep with him. I think I'm going to learn a lot from what he's doing and just cross-collaborate on a lot of information that he's experienced and I'm seeing in the industry. So let me tell you a little bit of Andrew. Andrew's a seasoned field CISO with over a decade of experience in the cybersecurity and intelligence domain. As an expert in enterprise solutions architect and security strategy, managing security service provider, MSSP, and security operations center, SOC, leadership and transformation. Andrew excels in aligning technology solutions with business objectives to enhance organizational security. His extensive background includes pivot roles at Leidos, CrowdStrike, and IBM, where he led the development of complex security solutions, managed and led large SOC organizations, and transformed cybersecurity and risk management programs for both federal and Fortune 500 private sector organization. Andrew's technical expertise spans threat intelligence, SOC operations, zero trust implementation, security architecture, comprehensive threat detection, remediation strategy development, and is recognized as a thought leader, and he has contributed to numerous publications and spoken at industry events. So you can see Andrew has a wealth of knowledge. So grab a coffee, grab a tea, and let's hack at it. Welcome, Andrew. How you doing? Give me 1 second here. Let's make sure your audio is turned on. There we go. Can you hear me?
Cool. Yep, loud and clear.
Awesome. Not bad. How's your day going so far?
It's good. It's busy as always, but keeps it fresh, keeps it challenging, which is always fun in the world of cybersecurity and kind of strategy development. But yeah, it's good.
Never stops, right?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
So I want to jump in here because I know we were kind of going right from the conversation as we started to meet. We started to talk about what's going on in the industry. So tell me a little bit, what are you seeing as the industry risk right now?
So I think that, industry risk in general is, I think there's different ways of looking at it, right? Mm-hmm. So, that's important to kind of look at. Let's start with kind of just, I think, the tactical stuff, like what's going on, what's relevant right now that people need to be kind of evaluating. I think the industry risk, I think, is blind spots in just, are users actually who they say they are? And what do they have access to? Okay. Right. And this is really just the continued shift by adversaries towards using identities, right, mm-hmm. to access environments and to compromise. And I think this is an area that many orgs are still coming to terms with and trying to understand better, right? They're not, as I like to say, they're not hacking in, they're logging in. Mm-hmm. And I think that risk in general, right around the identity, because if you think about it, if I get my credentials stolen, what do I have access to? It's mm-hmm. not just my email, it's like any platforms that I use that for. God forbid someone has, is reusing a password, but data is kind of in applications in the cloud and it's all used for different functions. And so I think really coming to terms with what the identity gives people mm-hmm. to use for productivity benefits, but also what you're granting adversaries and attackers by that. So I think this is really the overwhelming shift of, traditional endpoint or hacking in, which is absolutely important, but the shifting risk to identity, to supply chain, to who you're doing business with. Mm-hmm. And that's a separate one too, right? So now we're getting up into like business partnerships, but supply chain, not just of technologies you use, but who you're doing business with.
Right.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that's a two-way street, Brandon, mm-hmm. right? So, third-party risk is, it's not me, it's you. It could also be me. Right. So what's your exposure, not just of a breach, but who you're serving? And are you actually the target or is it someone else? And so I think that's a big shift I see of orgs really starting to understand and accept and build towards, okay, it's got to be about now protecting our users wherever they are and how they access systems and really needing to look that deeply but also how we're adapting to the changing threats, whether it's supply chain, technologies we use, businesses we work with, or just even like AI, which I know we're going to get into.
100%.
But, I think like that's where I think some of this industry risk, it can be kind of hard to reflect that. I think one other, key point, and then, would love your perspective here, but I think compliance
Mhm.
and regulatory pressures is an important risk to understand, really, where maybe there's a board or regulatory body or, kind of compliance frameworks. We're seeing the belts of compliance and regulatory tighten. And I see a lot of organizations really now figuring out, okay, we've never really done governance risk compliance. We've always kind of gone bottom check marks, but that's not enough anymore for whether it's cyber insurers or, regulatory bodies or even investors. And they're asking for more. And I think that's an inflection point of a risk of, are we protecting the business and what we built enough to manage against what potential loss could be, but whether that loss is even we're overspending on cyber insurance or we're going to get fined. And I think there's that increasing perspective. So yeah, I mean, a lot of different ways to kind of look at that of industry risk, but I think it's threats that are happening, business and kind of technology partnerships, then overall just how businesses are perceiving risk, whether that's themselves or others placing that upon them.
So going back to what you're saying, I'm going to go from governance and then we'll work our way back to the kind of identity access management, I'll call them privilege access.
Sure.
To your point with governance, right? Administrative controls, technical controls, physical controls, kind of that. I think what you're seeing, and I agree with you, the third party liability, and put that in quotation right now, is a lot of partners and governance and all that is now requiring that. They're requiring, if you're going to work with us, we need to know where you sit. What is your current security posture? What framework do you follow? Do you actually have your security posture into a certain maturity that now you can send us artifacts and confirm that that's actually in place? Not like you talked about, you can check the box. Oh, of course I have a SIM. Of course I have EDR. Okay, how is that managed? Hold on here. That's a big question. We have it in place. Okay, but when's the last time you looked through your logs? Sorry.
100%.
What are those, right? Like you have all those things where you're like, okay, you're not where we need you to be. But again, I think with organizations you're talking about, that's part of the due diligence, which helps to enforce, are you doing the technical controls properly? Do you have a certain maturity of, people, process, and technology that's being managed that you can now validly say, if you're working with me, I can go, here you go, versus it's 80% implemented, it's 20% supported, it's this, and you're like, okay, we need you 80% right across the board, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, this wrapping for people who are not like direct security or risk practitioners, right, where many orgs may have like one, maybe two, like, IT people, or maybe you have like a couple security folks. Even if you have a whole team, right, I think it's important to understand and acknowledge that risk and security is not, as much as we want everyone's job as security, it's also not something that's well understood by many people in an org, and maybe only of a certain few. And so I think the important part there, to your point, the governance, the controls, it's about making security and risk, I think, more accessible to the non-technical and non-security people to really understand how we speak in the language of where it's the finance team or the executive leaders or even different business units, and them understanding, hey, just who has access to material, right? And kind of, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but simplifying, I think, the risk management language to say, look, what do we need to be governing? What do we need to be tracking? And just, what does that mean for you, right? So as we reach across the aisle, and I think that'll breed a lot better conversation around what controls do we need, because I think that it becomes better understood, but also helps with that validation, because that's the lost in translation gap there is a constant thing that I see talked about and I see all the time.
Right.
I just think that's an important part. Like, you can follow a framework all day long, but if we're not helping the other stakeholders or business people that security is there to enable and empower, then we're just not having the right discussion still, right? So how do we make that accessible, I think, is the important part too.
Well, I think it's the Venn diagram, right? Like, they have their business and their operations and their business continuity and what they need to do. Security has what's that conversation that's the connecting in the middle there, that both divisions, departments get what they need, but still meet in the middle like you're talking about. And I think that's, I mean, even talking to a colleague today, seeing a report, seeing the information and kind of going through it and going, that speaks to your role, but it doesn't speak to the business. And they're like, oh, but what would the business be looking for? And then you kind of talk about how the top down approach and what they're thinking and how you have to now present up, right? And sometimes you talk about it, and I'm sure you've heard this, is manage up, right? You might manage down, but you also have to manage up to make sure you're still on the same page, because something that I'm sure, executives that are watching this, and even guys that are breaking the industry, you want to give them as much information as possible. As a security analyst and engineer, like you've got data after data after data. Well, that executive has like 10 minutes to consume that because they have 100 things on their plate, critical fires they're putting out. So when you come with a thing, they want to know, like, just Cole's notes. What is it? What's the risk? What's the, what's our exposure? What's the cost? How quickly can we get it implemented? Is it going to impact the business in any way? What do I have to look at supporting this? Do I have to buy resources? Like all these questions they're going to start asking. But if you're just going data driven, that, hey, I'm looking at the alerts that we're getting, we're having all these alerts of different things, and we're looking at different threat actors coming in. They're like, okay, so what?
Yeah, right. Like, so what? But like, great. Like it's doing its job. And you're like, well, no, it's not. And it's like, well, that's not getting translated well, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the most valuable things that security practitioners, leaders, executives, et cetera, just a basic question to ask is just either of themselves, but I think to really align with the business, is just, what are our crown jewels? And that doesn't have to be a system, right? It can be data, it can be business functions, it can be regions, it can be an output, right? And I think that really helps. Okay, based upon that, how is it protected? Because that's direct revenue or mission enablement. And that really helps center, I think, orgs on, okay, what is connected there? Who's using it? What do we need to properly protect that? You sort of work your way out versus having to boil the ocean. And I see that as a really good sort of self-reflection exercises. Do I even know what the crown jewels of our organization that we're protecting are? Right. And if not, well, okay, let's start there maybe. Right. And really kind of align with that. And that's a strong point to start from.
And I think I agree with you. And one of the things when I ever go into a customer's new environment, net new, I tell them that we have to do a business impact analysis, right, and a security gap assessment. So at least it gives me an understanding of what's their critical systems, people, process, technology in the environment. And if their business went down, that would be what's been impacted in loss of revenue, loss of customer, satisfaction, or even brand equity, or whatever that may be, or even some of the, as you work with stakeholders, board of directors, what's going to keep them up at night, right? What does that mean? And then also you start to go through and you understand which systems and processes are affected, what people, what do they have in place for, disaster recovery and redundancies. And then you can start drawing out the program. And then you look at the security, as you know, then you look at the gaps. Okay, what are you doing to secure that? Well, we have this 1, 2, and 7. Okay, hold on. What happened to the gap there? They're like, oh, well, we, they didn't want to invest. That wasn't really, urgency right now. We were building the business. We acquired another company at that time. Okay, understood. Now let's draw a roadmap and get us where we need to be.
Exactly right. And I think, you kind of hit on it. I mean, there's a lot of, I think the big gap, right, in organizations that I see is, there's executives up here that are speaking, or boards that are speaking about the business. There's everyday, kind of individual contributor employees doing work. I think it's really the power and influence of that sort of, I'll say, mid-level management, but that gap of business strategy down to act and kind of risk, like, we need to reduce X or we need to do this, and then translate to like, well, how do we do this? Right. And what do we need? And I think really also, to your point, managing up, that like, you're never going to be without risk. Like, a breach will happen. It's a matter of how much are we willing to lose or spend before it gets to be too much, or how do we get things back online as fast as possible? And I think that's that, there's a lot of buzz about it, right? Especially lately, I see, but just that aspect of not just cybersecurity, but cyber resiliency. Like, how do we wade through a incident and keep things online and bring it back as quickly as possible? Because that's like, how much are we willing to lose there? I think it's a real important metric that cyber risk quantification can be difficult to analyze as an org, but I don't think it has to be. I think let's just look at our P&L sheets. and to say, look, how much revenue do we need every day? Are we making, but like how much is in our reserve, right? Our coffers. There was a statistic I saw somewhere that like attacks on SMB organizations, 33% of them were actually hiking prices to account for a cyber attack. So like they're passing the cost of a breach onto a consumer. Well, if we look at economic, kind of situations and volatility, then is their consumer willing to pay for that? I don't know. So what does that mean for the business? Like, has a cyber attack and lack of investment actually driven away customers? And you could argue yes, right? So I just think that resiliency point of how much are we willing to lose versus investing really starts to create something when you look at just what's the bottom line and kind of dollars in, dollars out, and what we have to play with on a regular basis.
And I think to your point, I think there's a happy balance, because I mean, if you're building up your systems and your security to partner with the right people and protect your customers and do all that, and you're increasing your overhead operations cost, I agree with that. But if you're at a certain level and every year you're just bumping up the price to your customer, I would say, okay, that's something to evaluate, because eventually a partner or a competitor is going to come out with the same business model, same level, if not better security, less cost. Your customers are now going to go over to them and now start to have that experience, right? And you're going to lose them because the value of your product is not correlated to the operations cost, it's to profitability.
100%. Yeah. And I think, even there, right, kind of another angle to take it is, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, like, kind of whether it's auditors or others, but like, I think whether, people love it or hate it, I think the emergence of SOC 2 reporting and that sort of attestation that at least we take security seriously as a business and protect customer information, more and more it's on like contracts and requirements. And if buyers are presented with an option of one is SOC 2 versus the other, we increasingly see that SOC 2, i.e. I'm invested in taking security seriously, is actually a market driver, that they're going to choose that one over the other. Right. And so I think that's where, also it's sort of everyone wants to work with bigger orgs, everyone wants bigger contracts or to do bigger missions or whatever it might be. And I think that's where, those downstream pressures, but also where that's showing up in contract language is important, right? Recognize, and that, how do we make sure that we have both the opportunity, but are also able to deliver on the stuff that we need and are held to by contract with their business partners.
And I think you're seeing that more, and like I am, where it's the due diligence process. Like, hey, we're at that phase now. You've sold us the product and solution. We're excited about it. Yep. But now our due diligence, or people are going to come, lawyers and security and compliance. They're now in this phase, and now you're going to talk to them about the contract, but also they're going to send you this 300-page questionnaire that now you're going to go through, and we're going to do the due diligence, which they're asking for, ISO 27001, SOC 2 type 2, do you have any DPA? Do you have all this, right? Like, they're going to ask for all that to see where you're at. Now, if you meet their baseline standard, which people have to understand this, most of the customers that do this and do downstream, like these big companies, have a compliance standard that you have to meet and now partner up with them and work with them. If you don't meet that, they might give you some time to do it, but there's this kind of like line where it's, you have 90 days. At 90 days, if you don't hit this mark, sorry, we're going to move on to the next person.
Well, yeah. And prime example. So, we were working through some of this with one of our partners that we were helping advise, and a manufacturing org that got, the pressure downstream from some of the big automakers, right? They're in the manufacturing space. And it was simply, hey, look, like, you must be now at this level, right? Also because they have certain compliance requirements within the automotive industry they have to meet, and kind of how their, TISAX is what it's called as an example. And so this manufacturer really was faced with kind of a challenge that they had to suddenly up-level their security, which was a lot of money, for better for worse, but it kept them in that place because the honest truth is they were not the only one that could provide that service.
Right.
And so, I think the legal aspect or the contracts, but, another angle to look at it, right, and kind of talk about, cyber resilience to a certain extent, only just, can we recover? Can we detect, respond, and recover quickly? Right? Is, looking at and aligning with the business on, like, what are our legal or contractual obligations based on what we do to deliver certain things, right? So if a manufacturer goes down, obviously that's money, widgets are not making, but also there's probably a transportation or logistics supplier that's counting them, giving them that product to then move. So if they can't move that product, is that a contractual agreement there that they can't adhere to? And then is that logistics provider not able to, breaking contracts because they can't give it to whomever needs it, right? And I think that's when you kind of take a pause and think about it, it's like, oh my God, the supply chain, kind of extent of it. But this is why cyber resilience is like just that manufacturer is so important to deliver what you need and make sure you're protecting that business, because there's multiple levels beyond just your downtime that could impact it. And that's, I think, an important reflection point of what is that business ecosystem you work in.
So going back to kind of the original topic, talk to me about, like, people are watching this. What does it mean to be cyber resilience?
Yeah. It's kind of, as I just sort of mentioned a little bit, and definitely, kind of lots to unpack here. It's a big, heady topic. Cyber resilience, just look, breaches and incidents are going to happen, but it's, can we, detect and respond and restore? And I think it's that restore thing, right? That point there, that can we keep systems online that are business critical or serve that mission, and work our way through an incident while keeping the business running, or bring it back as quickly as possible, right? And so that's that key kind of component of resilience of, are we able to recover there, but also then how are we taking the lessons learned and really, like, hey, what caused that breach to happen, right? What caused that attack? And now let's actually do something with that information to build up our resilience, right? We get, kind of, shot boosters every couple of years, right? One's never going to be enough. I get a flu shot every year. I've got to constantly adapt to the changing times. And how are we then, we as defenders, let's say, for viewers kind of asking themselves, how are they using experienced attacks or reports or audits to really just refine how they're protecting that business, right? And what its function is. And I think that's kind of one of the most basic ways to explain cyber resilience is in that recovery, but also continuous improvement aspect.
So I'm gonna broaden that just on my standpoint, because I totally agree with what you're saying. I think people need to think about the whole business, because you could have a power outage, you could have, water flood, you could have like anything, you could have a pandemic. I mean, we had that, like, all these things you need to think about the cyber resilience and go through the planning of your disaster recovery. Now, of course, there's the likelihood, right? The likelihood of another pandemic coming, anytime soon is probably very low. But depending on the area that you're in, you might get a tornado, you might get a flood, you might have a snowstorm that takes out the power. What does that mean on top of, like, the cyber? Like, don't think just narrowly, we're now focused on business email compromises and ransomware events, and that's all that's going to happen to our company. And all of a sudden, your power outage, you're like, well, we never planned for this.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And no, I really appreciate you bringing that up, right? Because I think risk is many different things, not just cyber or IT. It could just be, it's also like, supplier, right? Kind of AWS and Azure had some of those outages recently. And so it's like, well, if we can't even access anything, what do we do? How do we operate? What does that mean for us? Or is it a natural disaster or something else happening? And those are just, I think, those scenarios that are really great to flesh out of, what is resiliency for us as a business? And then what is our dependency on technology or the internet? And then those different things that come with it, one of which obviously is cyber attacks and, kind of incidents, but it can just be a simple, kind of cloud or internet outage for an extended period of time. Like, what do you do?
Well, and that's an important point. It could be like your SaaS provider. You could have an ERP solution, CRM, whatever, from a third party, and they're out.
And
you're like, okay, well, we're down. We can't invoice, accounts payable, accounts receivable. Like, we're completely down. But it's not a cyber attack on us. It might be your partner that's having an issue, right? And then that's it. Like, I think that's my point. And I think, we're on the same page. Is you have to look holistically. Like, go through your business impact analysis, look at all critical systems and processes. Where does that impact? Like, if we can go now paper and pen for the next 24 hours or 5 days and still sustain business, that's great. We're good. Wait till that recovers. But if it's a critical system, like I said, a SaaS solution, that's another partner, and that's where all your data is, and that's all, then what do you do? Like, what's your redundancy plan?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think that the key element of what we're talking through is, I think, the importance of every organization, no matter of size, really just what is your cybersecurity, what is your cybersecurity and like IT strategy, right? we have to think the strategy is how you plan and account for and work through this stuff and how it aligns with the business. And I see that many orgs unfortunately skip that. I think that governance or strategy or business alignment step, as I've been really unpacking about, I think that is really truly where I see a lot of organizations and decision makers and leaders really starting to correct towards, which I love, because it's what is our strategy? How do we handle these things? How are we not only aligning with the business, but also helping it grow? How are we thinking a little bit further? How are we accounting for all this? And that's that strategy I think that really needs to get put in place. And that does take a little bit of effort and time to say, like, look, let's take a pause and make sure we get this done, because when then you hit the gas, you're going to race ahead versus backfiring and sputtering.
100%. And one of the things I want to add to that is the due diligence of test to measurable results.
Yes.
One of the things about cyber resilience, and I learned that from being in incident response and working with that, is, are you testing tabletop exercise, your team, your policies, your playbooks, your run books, all that, to make sure they work? And then are you doing like a stress test to see if does it work under pressure in that time that you can do the backups and the recovery, restore your servers? Is your team responding and threat hunting and be able to shut things down? Is all that, process and disaster recovery able to happen, even in incident response, in the timely manner? Because I know when I was working with an organization, I was doing what we call the enterprise risk, I think enterprise risk and compliance incident response. And basically we took it through, and they had an incident just after, and they were able to respond within 15 minutes, but they had it down.
Right.
They knew what to do, and they worked it. And to get more companies like that, because as you and I know, that went from an alert that they were able to action to maybe a business email compromise to a data exfiltration to a ransomware event, but they were able to catch it at that first initial stages and stop it.
Well, and so, I mean, that idea of, I think tabletop exercises are so invaluable. And I'll say this, I think, obviously it can be a guided process, right? Definitely you've never been through one. That's where, consultants or service providers could be helpful. But I think in the age of AI as well, even just asking it to create you and I think this is the key word, a realistic, kind of current tabletop or scenario exercise that'll help you sort of like really pressure test and understand what does it look like. Even throw a wrench in it, be like, hey, in the middle of the incident, like suddenly we've got like an internet outage or something like that, or something else, we can't coordinate or something like that. I think the other thing that you mentioned, I'm a big fan of, if you're able, like that idea of, testing your response plan, like active, that's kind of what's called, kind of purple teaming, right? A little bit of whether it's, running a pen test of a certain type of thing in line with that scenario and seeing how your SOC or your security team responds.
Right.
Do they know it? Do they not know it's coming? And really kind of like trialing it out, or where those solutions like breach attack simulation tools are used. There's different strategies, but I think really like not just, hey, are we doing a tabletop? Do we sort of understand some things? But let's go through the paces. To your point, you guys practiced that, and they were able to get through that incident in 15 minutes. If the first time you crack open your incident response plan is during one, that's going to be an ugly experience, especially if you don't even know who to call first or what to do. And I think really that planning, but the practice and testing of it is incredibly important.
Well, and I want to add to that, if anyone's watching this, do it internal, but make sure you put the criteria and the variables on it, that you do a stress test. Because what I found was, when I was doing the tabletop exercises for organizations, there could have been a key individual in that, in the department or in the company that knew everything about the process and what was happening. So pulling them out of the engagement because they weren't available, and I put that in quotations, right? They weren't available and not able to respond. Now put the stress on the rest of the team to be able to now, what is that backup strategy? How do we cover? What is our backups? What are we looking for? And then you start to see the team now get engaged, because you never know if one of the key subject matter experts is not going to be available. Right. And how do you start working through that? And when we did that stress test, you could see where the gaps were, but it was good to do it in a non-event, situation and have that pressure and stress, because something that I was doing was there was clocks. Because I think, again, if anyone's gone through an incident, and hopefully, you've got through it, knock on wood, but the threat actor's pushing, right? They're doing things to push the time, to put stress on the organization, to say, hey, look, I'm going to publish your information within 12 hours if you don't do X, don't pay us, whatever that may be. Now it's 8 hours. Now it's 4. Oh, now I'm calling your partners and your clients and I'm telling them that you've been compromised. And all this pressure's on the organization while they're trying to see if their backups are viable, start to look at recovering their systems, try and have a negotiation internally. Are they going to pay or are they not going to pay? All that going on in the situation. And if you bring that to the tabletop exercise and put that in that stress test, then they kind of get the experience of, oh, this is really what happens. Yeah. And you have like 4 hours, 5 hours of going through this. This could be 72 hours. This could be longer, but now you get exposure to it, right?
Well, and I think I love that. I think that's why I was kind of getting at the realistic, really don't be like, well, we had a phishing, in some stolen creds, we had to rotate and cool and then write a report. Like that'll happen. That's not necessarily a formal incident, right? But really put that pressure on to simulate what attacks are like today, not what they were before, right? Are you suddenly we see, attackers are not just calling, they're actually filing regulatory violations with regulators. So now you've got regulators coming at you, be like, what happened? And then now you're in audit, kind of risk and kind of exposure there. I think that's an important, kind of wrench to throw in a scenario, but using, I think, the recent trends of how attackers are working, just doing some of that baseline research, or again, AI helps a lot of that, but I think it makes it a lot more realistic, right? And where it's not solely dependent, to your point, on a key person.
Right.
And that's that kind of power, I'd say, of documentation, process, et cetera, that it's not sexy, it's a pain in the butt, but documenting key stakeholders, key functions, alternates, et cetera. I think a good analogy for folks to kind of reference and utilize is most businesses that have an office probably have some sort of they have a fire suppression system, and they probably have some sort of fire drill plan. And there's a key stakeholder in every business, every team that's okay, count heads and make sure we get out.
Yeah.
You've got the little vest. Who is that for your IT and cyber?
Right.
Work through that kind of idea, that what does that look like? And then who are the people and alternates we need to call?
Right.
Someone's not found, on vacation, or whatever, right?
No, totally true. Totally agree with you. Now, I know you brought up AI. So I know this could be a big topic. What are you seeing on the impact of AI right now on organizations and cybersecurity?
Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of a two-headed, kind of two-sided sword, I would say, right? Well, almost three. So I think there's let's kind of break it down to a couple areas, and we can unpack any of them first. So I think there's obviously a lot out there about how adversaries and threat actors are using AI to speed up attacks, or what is the capabilities versus some things that we see pop in the news, but what's realistically happening every day and kind of what's tangibly there. Mm-hmm. I think there's also the inside aspect of how are your own people using AI.
Okay.
And what is legitimate, what's allowed and okay, what's not. But I think the important thing, it's a little bit different, that I don't think is talked about as much, is where is there an opportunity to really engage our employees in our workplace in how we can safely use AI, but to empower them in their use.
Right.
So I think that's a key element of it. And then honestly, how are we using AI to keep up with threats? So this is where, kind of AI-driven SOCs or AI, integrated with security tools and so forth is also important. So those are kind of the three main areas that AI is really dominating and top of mind for many different people. But I think I see either folks that are not so much worried about the threat actor aspect, but they're very concerned about the internal. There's the, kind of opposite flip side of that. But then there's, I think, orgs that are a little bit more mature, we talk about strategy, we talk about resilience, that are sort of balancing both. And then how do we best cost effectively manage the risk of both of these using, whether it's people, process, technology, AI solutions, et cetera, to our benefit to be able to bridge that gap.
So I'm going to go in the middle one. I think the resilience of the organization I'm seeing more is the data privacy. I'm going to call that more kind of wrap around the AI internally and how organizations and employees are using it. Because I mean, it doesn't come to a sense of like, we know is if you use AI, you're not going to get hacked, right? It's not going to, AI is not going to compromise your company and go and shut down and hack through your servers and do all that. More concern than I've seen is how are people putting data into AI and now making that from a, private information confidential to now public information, right? From having AI review your meetings, Teams, Zooms, whatever, and they don't know that tool's recording them. And then now it's stored in China, which if it's a company in China, now China's government has access to that data and they didn't do the due diligence on that side, right? Just understanding how that AI is working, where the data is stored. So I see that.
100%. I mean, I think it's also opening up another can of worms, right? And so I'll back my wind. I think some practical approaches there that folks can take, but I think it's really getting to the heart of what I was saying before, right? Kind of the beginning of our conversation. It's putting a big onus on data. Like, what data do you have? Because it's that's being put into AI, or that AI is secretly tapping or watching or tied into. And so I think it's really forcing organizations to sort of reflect a little bit about what do we have, what do we do, and then like what data sensitivity is this? Like, how sensitive is it? And like, who actually needs access and where is it going?
Right.
I think that's been something that's an animal that has grown, which is data use, the cloud, everything else. And so it's sprawling and kind of going everywhere. But data governance, right, and tagging, and that's why I think that crown jewels, at least, of like what is too sensitive for us to lose, right? Who's even using this? Who's even tapping it? So I think that some of the practical strategies are just whether you have I'll say I think a SIM, every org at this point in time should have one. There's different levels of it, but just get that observability. But that can kind of tell you based upon the logs, where are people going? What are they using? Like what web-based LLMs are people randomly leveraging, but also like what's installed in our environment?
Right.
What sort of, executables or other things? And that's where, endpoint security, endpoint management tools, or IT asset management solutions can really highlight some of that and surface that of just what is our experienced use so far of AI? And are we okay with that? And I think that's an important question to ask first before starting to take that next step. And I think that's a pivotal moment for orgs too. We can demonize the use of AI and, oh my God, it's only got to be like our corporate Copilot or ChatGPT Pro. And absolutely, maybe that's the right choice. But I think also it's, look, if we see other automation tools or other things, it's a sign that employees want to do better, be more efficient. And so I think welcoming that conversation versus like, no, because they're going to find a different tool, but opening that up to like, how do you need to work? And here's, okay, now that based upon the context, here's approved solutions we can go maybe invest in. And I think that brings that business and security closer. It's not the group that's only saying no, it's saying, yes, let's do this, but let's do it safely.
100%.
Right. I think that's a really important one. I'll say too, I think another practical, many orgs are probably on Microsoft, right? And I saw that recently Microsoft, Purview, right, that, the compliance and kind of data management and classification, module they have is actually going to allow for tagging of data and then preventing certain tag data to go in to be put into Copilot.
Right.
So that was really cool, right? I like seeing that where, hey, based upon this, how can we start to maybe corral users where we don't, I don't want to say don't trust them, but where the data is too sensitive, but then how are we monitoring where we are seeing like those violations?
Right.
So like insider risk, like why is someone constantly trying to upload tag data into something? Like we need to have a conversation.
Right.
But I think that's the importance of bringing people into the fold.
Well, then that thing that wraps around the DLP policy, right? Because now you're incorporating the data loss prevention that if that document, that file, that even the content or the word is now flagged as, it violates the organization if it gets uploaded to anything. But now you're talking about like with Copilot. Now, if that does that, that's great. It helps to support the DLP. To add on to what you're saying, I think companies, like you're saying, need to go through a due diligence. It's kind of a restrictive process right now because it's the wild, wild west when it comes to AI.
Correct.
Like, there's so many different AI tools are out there. Again, I'm not against them, not good or bad or whatever, but going through the due diligence, hey, let's submit a process. Hey, I want to use this tool. Here's my business case of the business process I want to use. This is what I want to do it. This is the data I'm going to put in. Have it evaluated, have the organization and the tool evaluated, and then see if they come up with, yes, it's approved, or maybe it's, no, that's not approved, but we have another solution that does the same thing. Can you use this? Same business process. It fits what your needs are. And here you go. You can use it. I think more organizations need to adopt that. And like you said, I agree with the conversation versus the shadow IT is I'll use it. And if I get in trouble, then we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, I mean, one of the most, kind of unsung benefits or influencers of securities, like that culture I mentioned. I'm just very passionate about this with the human element, because it's like the humans are, either your strongest advocates or your weakest link, depending on your perspective, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that constant, kind of one or the other, there's a way to make it in the middle to improve the culture and kind of security awareness of an org and how we using tools, and bringing them into the fold actually could benefit an org's overall culture and security awareness in general, which then trails into like security awareness training and other stuff that is referencing some of this. But I think that willingness to work with the business instead of saying, no, we can't do these things, is, definitely a blocker. I'll say this too, and I do want to hit on, you mentioned want to look at both sides, like those orgs in the middle. Yeah. I think AI use by adversaries is, are we going to see a digital Pearl Harbor and kind of crazy, thing? I don't know. But AI advancement and use by adversaries is definitely ticking up, and it is moving the needle. And so I think while we can talk about lowering the barrier of entry and other things, I think the real conversation really needs to be at, look, is the speed and scale of attacks of different types, where it's automating either the reconnaissance and kind of scanning, or the adaptation, or the kind of exploitation of environments, is that simply too fast and too much for us to handle?
Right.
And that's, I think, the question that orgs really need to kind of look at and accept, that look, AI is going to be part of, it's amplifying threat actors and how they're attacking and targeting orgs, mm-hmm. but it's, can we withstand that speed and scale of an attack? Because I think, like, I saw Palo Alto's report recently, Global Wire report said, hey, from the time of compromise to exfiltration, data exfiltration. So like not just initial access and then moving around, like exfiltration data, it's like 72 minutes. The fastest was 25 minutes. Like, can we simply keep up with that before our data is gone?
Right.
Like, that's driving, I think, the need for obviously a lot of the tools to use kind of AI and support investigations and detection. But I think really that strategy, can we actually keep up with this as defenders, or do we need to maybe start thinking about, look, I've got to start going back to fundamentals, least access, least privilege, identity access management. I have to have full visibility across an environment to be able to see what's going on. I can't just count on it's only going to be the endpoint anymore, or, it's only identity, but I don't have visibility in the cloud or applications. So I think that is an inflection point that I see, that the AI threats against organizations by adversaries, yes, it's lowering the barrier of entry, but it's really about that speed and volume, that can orgs simply keep up with this? And if a breach were to happen, could we do it within that, let's say, that time period? To your point about the tabletop, let's run one, 72 minutes to exfiltration. What do we do? Right? And I think that's an important reflection point for folks. So just that observability, foundational access control, just systems, all the fundamentals that we've known for years, I think is actually at a point where, look, if we're going to meaningfully move the needle, we've got to go back to basics in a way and make sure we haven't skipped those fundamental steps.
No, I agree. And I think I have a little devil's advocate side too, and something I learned is being in cybersecurity sales, one of the challenges I always found was threat actors don't have limitations.
Right.
They have the same tools that we have as defenders and trying to protect, but they don't have the limitations of, well, we don't have the budget, or we can't implement that right now. They're working in teams and teams and teams of people, right? That they can get access to the same tooling that companies are implementing, and be able to utilize that, be able to evaluate, assess it, look at the holes, be able to use the same AI tools that we're using to increase our security. They're looking how to break it down. So I find sometimes, and I want to be clear with people that are looking at security, you got to have those conversations on how to protect the key assets like you're talking about it, and be open to start working towards that efficiently, cost effectively. Of course, I understand you can't throw millions of dollars if that's not in your budget,
Right.
but you got to do it in a way that that's what the threat actors are going to do anyways. So it's either you do it now, and the worst thing I see in being an incident response is you do it now as you're starting to build, or an incident comes and then you're doing it at a sprint. Because we should have had that now. Why? Let's go. Let's put it in, right? I'd rather you take 6 months to 18 months and slowly implement it, make sure it's done right over time and distance, versus we just got hit in 72 hours. You're implementing everything now.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think, it's really important, an adversary only has to be right once. We as defenders have to try to be right all the time, and that's never going to happen. But I think that knowledge of budget, right? Because there are certain things that will move the needle. And that's, I think, the risk conversation from the beginning is risk is different to every org. We can never be without it, right? But it's like, look, we only have X budget, and I can maybe just do MFA across the board. It's, even if it's just Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or something, right? Make it a little bit more challenging, right? To compromise you or to attack you, just kind of get that observability. Like, if all you have is, endpoint security, okay, not great, but maybe try and get an MDR provider to at least watch that throughout the night, right? And have that response. I think that's where there are measurable, meaningful, and budget-friendly solutions. It doesn't have to be an SMB or mid-market or small entity is not going to be running Fortune 100 or federal cybersecurity. They're just not. But it's about what is accessible and affordable that will actually move the needle. And there's plenty of options there, even like the ones I was saying of just like, I think information security principles and like system configuration. Like, we don't need RDP open to the internet everywhere.
Right.
You don't. Like, just don't turn that on unless we need it. Is that going to take a lot of effort? Maybe, maybe not. But it's just about how we actually designing systems. That can move the needle is my point.
100%. Now, you made a comment, and I want to jump into that.
Sure.
We're talking about MDR. So tell me, through your experience, like, what are some of the blind spots that you've seen from providers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll go back to, I think the identity, right? So, I mean, I think it's important for providers, right? It's really also kept up with the shift in security tooling over the years, right? So, we've seen this sort of arc from, the old days of, kind of promise of SIM, but the complexity of implementing it to, well, users are now on their devices. So EDR really took hold, and it's, well, wait, the cloud and identity is more prevalent. We need to add these logs, and oh shoot, now in order to do full-blown XDR, we need access to everything, and we're back to SIM and threat management. So it's made it kind of this interesting cyclical approach. But I think the blind spots that I'm seeing is really, I think, some struggles for providers in keeping up with that shift, but also where end users are also going. So like, if you're looking for support, like, you want that full observability. So like, as a provider, it's not just, hey, we're like identity monitoring, identity threat detection response is now essential. I would argue we need access to the network data, firewalls, network switches, that traffic. We need access and see the cloud, because users aren't, I'm working from home today. We have our office in downtown Denver. I'm not, like here, I'm not, working within the confines of my, kind of my office network. I'm using every different other platform. And so that visibility is really needed, I think, Brandon, from a provider, and accepting that there are blind spots, but like, what are the implications of not monitoring that for your clients? But I think also the benefit of doing that, and how organizations needing this help can come to you and say, look, you're doing this at a level that helps me as a business and what we do and everything we use. So I think that's where I see some of those blind spots, is the challenges of what security technologies and the complexity, because there's so many out there, but then really, how are you maintaining that awareness and that security monitoring and the different capabilities to match how businesses are working today versus where we were even 2 years ago.
Right.
So, I mean, that's what I typically am seeing, and in conversations of where, especially the service provider, kind of channel and industries, kind of an inflection point of how they need to be running security programs versus just using some tools.
So one of the things I found is, I mean, sadly, I think there's a scale. Those top kind of MSPs that really deliver, really show up. Then there's kind of that mid tier, and then there's kind of that lower tier where they're doing their best, but I don't think they have their process and strategy in place that really helps to mature organizations. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing the gap is that having a really good baseline assessment and evaluating that with the customer, right? Your client, and saying, okay, look, we did an evaluation. Here's where your organization is. Here's where we find critical, high, medium, low risk, even for 5 nines business continuity IT side or security where your gaps are. And this is what we recommend. And we can draw you a roadmap.
Right.
This is what you need to start implementing. And I think having those tough conversations, because I know some MSPs and MSPs don't want to have that because it doesn't meet with the statement of work. It doesn't meet with the pricing model that the customer wants and their budget. And they don't want to have that conversation because it might put that customer in someone else. Right. I'd rather do my fiduciary responsibility and tell them what they need and start working towards a mature environment versus them bouncing around from MSP or MSSP and then have an incident or an outage or that and go, well, why didn't anyone tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that economically looking at kind of, as we talk about the speed and scale of threats and the need to run security programs and compliance, I mean, it's incredibly challenging as well as, unfortunately expensive for orgs of all sizes. And I think this is really where the power and potential for quality managed service providers or MSPs or MSSPs to really provide that cost-effective way, resource. But I think it also, there has to be at a certain point a line that's drawn, right? Of here's really what we need. We can't just keep, kicking it out, get a waiver for this, get a waiver for that. And I love how you mentioned the roadmap. Like instead of saying, look, I'm going to write a waiver for something, or I'm just not going to do it, we're going to kick it out of the sow. Let's just track it as a risk. Like, let's just start. Be like, it doesn't have to be full bore. Now, obviously, everyone's services are different, but I think that, look, let's just close up major gaps. Do that assessment. Be like, look, it doesn't have to be everything, but let's put these items on a roadmap. We're not ignoring them. We're going to talk about it in another quarter, and we're going to kind of really evaluate this of how we need to be budgeting for this together. And I think that's sort of, I guess you could say a land and expand, but that journey, right? I think that the MSPs have potential to take their client on where it's not all or nothing. It's really that service of guiding them through it, because you are that IT team. If you were your own IT or security team, you'd be making the same things. You can't get everything, but you're making those meaningful, kind of measurable steps and adjustments. And I think that's a promising area where we can level up security for orgs that maybe don't have the ability to do everything they want all of a sudden, but also to cost effectively manage that. And that's where I see, to be honest, some MSPs that we talk to or MSSPs, honestly, I'll say, I think maybe missing the mark is less willingness to really meet the client where they're at and scale and build while protecting security, but then doing maybe some IT or administrative things for them versus having to do the full boat.
Right.
And I think that's a disservice to all sides then.
Right.
Is no one's winning at that point. People jump around, or the MSP isn't growing or being able to even showcase what they do best.
Right. And I think and I'm going to call out the MSPs watching this, under promise and over deliver.
Yep.
Right. As you're going through that roadmap, keep delivering on your timelines, your objectives, and over deliver on your SLAs, your projects, things like that. That, to me, being a vCISO, would sustain our relationship ongoing. If I know every time I have a project in front of my MSP and I know they're going to deliver, and by the way, come back with more, and hey, we found this, we fixed this, we did that, and they do it every single time, that's going to be an MSSP or MSP for life. Right? I work with an organization right now. It's partners, Secure IT 360. Give them a little plug here, but every time we've had to reach out to them, they showed up. They were on the calls, war rooms. They were there. Even if it was 12 hours, 18 hours straight, they were there. They showed up. So I know if we were ever in an incident with one of my customers that I was working with them, we were in an incident, call them, show up, they're there. So that to me is like viable partner that I need in the partnership of working with an organization, that I know that I'm not going to worry about that relationship, their service, their deliverables, and how they show up.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, you as a VC. So I think the other thing too, right, like, is that many MSPs, whether it's by name or contract or what have you, orgs are going to them, MSPs or MSSPs. You're effectively running the security program for an organization. You are their default, de facto, even if not by title, CISO. You're giving them that guidance. That's what they're looking to you for. And so whether you like it or not, you're kind of on the hook for running that program. And so it's your job to guide them, but also to follow through and to maintain awareness of the threats, the evolution. I think that's the really hard part in the MSP space, just handling everything, right? It's unforgiving.
Right.
Managing multiple verticals, compliance, threats, and having to do it at scale is incredibly challenging. But, for like it or not, that's the world the MSPs live in, and accepting and understanding, doing that education of the teams of what do we need to be tracking, what new threats or kind of risks are out there, how are we doing that? I think that inflection point as an MSP of our own resilience and what would a breach of our own customer be or ourselves, and how we accounting for that is critical. So you can properly guide your clients in that conversation.
100%. Now, I know we got 3 minutes left. Anything you wanted to finish off on? Any golden nuggets, tips?
Just start. Just start. Right? We can overthink. We can overanalyze. It's about just start with the fundamentals. Just just begin. I guess is what I'm saying to encourage. I see a lot of paralysis by analysis in the conversations that I have with MSPs, MSSPs, and users, et cetera. It's like, well, is that not it? I think the other thing, right, is just make it, I think, a little bit more basic, right? We know what, if you have gaps, right? And so you mentioned cyber risk assessment. I think it's like we could run a pen test, but if there's no SIM monitoring or SOC, is that going to actually be beneficial? Because we don't even know. We can't catch it, right? And I think it's where there's some aspects of a framework, right? That strategy. It is accessible. It doesn't have to be too complex. So like whether it's NIST CSF from risk management and kind of their structured guidance there, or CIS controls, so just tangibly like, what do we need to have? Pick a framework, align to it, quickly figure out kind of what your gaps are. They exist for a reason.
Right.
And I think that will really help streamline and standardize how orgs operate, how they need to think about their gaps, but also like what are the risks we have. And so those are just a couple of things I would say. And the last thing, I'm an old SIM guy, built SOCs and so forth, but bottom line, anybody watching or listening, I'd say, do you have the observability across everything in your org, if it's, where reasonable, to truly be able to monitor what's going on in your environment and what is, what is your crown jewels? That's where visibility in the cloud, the network, endpoints, identity, applications, that's really fundamentals at this point, right, in how business is working. So I think do that observability kind of pressure test and self-reflection too, because I think that opens the eyes to organizations as well.
The one thing I'll add to that is, if you find that you're stuck, like, and I'm talking to anyone that's watching this, you find you're stuck, you need help, reach out to like Scott or myself or someone like that can start to kind of see where the blockers are and help to mature the program. Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know because you're in it so deep that you don't know where to start. And then someone outside goes, oh, great, you're here, but let's start to work on these aspects, these strategies, this, and they start to mature the program because they have a fresh look. They have an outside perspective. I'm sure, Andrew, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, probably work with lots of different clients in different industries, different verticals, and say, okay, look, I know like these companies are doing this. Here's what I recommend. Here's a strategy. This what worked for your size of organization with them. Let's start to work forward. And they start to mature you, and they help get those blockers out of the way.
100%. Yeah. I mean, just, and you said it, Brandon, like whether it's, yourself, put you by, so you put my LinkedIn there. I'm more than happy to chat with anybody. It's just like sometimes just an extra person to just ask a question or take a fresh look is always beneficial, right? And to kind of think through it. And I think that's, kind of what I've seen honestly be best is, hey, let's just get a third party in there, take a quick look. And are we thinking about this the right way? And that goes, so far. Exactly.
Awesome. Now, if anyone's watching this or listening to this, Andrew Scott got his LinkedIn on below. Now, if you guys are listening to this, you can go to YouTube and check it out. Again, Andrew works for Total, www.total.com. Go check out the website. There's a lot of great information there. Andrew, thank you so much. This was a great stream. I learned a lot from our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. Appreciate it. Great to be on.
I mean, it's been really good, Andrew. So what we're going to do is give me a second here, guys. That was great. I mean, I learned a lot from Andrew and all the information that we talked about. And I mean, if you go through the industry risk, the cyber resilience, the AI impact, what we talked about, the blind spot, if you rewatch this can be your roadmap of what you start to need to look at in your organization, what you need to do, what you need to start looking at. I mean, we're just kind of closing out Q1, but Q1 and going to the next quarter, start to really draw that program. And I think it's really important to start looking at it now and moving that milestone. I mean, the biggest thing that I know from working with the organization, it's not about what you can do in 1 week, 1 month. It's what you can do over the next year to 2 years. Right? And you start working through that, start working with your team, be really engaged with your team, again, top down. Have those conversations, bottom up, learn how to talk to your executives, be open to the dialogue of maybe there's going to be a no right now, but doesn't mean they're rejecting you, but just it doesn't meet with the business strategy, and ask those questions. Well, teach me why that doesn't meet with the business strategy. What do I need to learn about the business that can help align our security program and strategy with the business? And that's what Andrew was talking about before, was those conversations help to make the business stronger with cybersecurity. So really great episode. Please share this with your family, friends, people, and colleagues. I think you can learn a lot from it, and just review this because there's a lot of golden nuggets from it. So don't forget, software is hackable, being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.